The helicopter came in low over the ridge just as the sun broke the horizon, rotor wash bending the hemlock trees and sending a family of ravens scattering into the gray October sky. I was alone in the observation room, 3 hours into a night shift, watching Subject 7 sleep on the infrared monitors when the motion sensors along the perimeter fence started screaming. My name is Dr. Rebecca Hale. I'm a wildlife veterinarian, or I was, before everything that happened at the Stillwater Research Facility in the fall of 2012. The facility sat at 4,100 feet in the remote Selkirk Mountains of northern Idaho, accessible only by logging road or air, funded through channels I never fully understood and operated under confidentiality agreements that made me nervous even then. We told ourselves we were protecting her. That's what we called it. Protection, rehabilitation, study under controlled conditions for the benefit of conservation science. We had ethics protocols, veterinary oversight, careful documentation of every interaction. We told ourselves we were the good ones. But when I heard the helicopter and saw armed personnel fast roping onto our compound in the pre-dawn darkness, I understood with absolute clarity that we'd been keeping a thinking being in captivity, and now someone with more authority and fewer scruples had come to take her. The Stillwater Research Facility was established in 2009 by the North American Wildlife Conservation Trust, a private foundation with deep pockets and connections that extended into federal wildlife agencies, university research programs, and, I suspected but never confirmed, certain branches of military intelligence. The official mission was studying threatened megafauna in remote wilderness areas. The actual mission was more complicated. I was recruited in early 2011, fresh from a residency in exotic animal medicine, specializing in great ape health and behavior. The job posting had been vague: veterinary position for large mammal research in remote field setting, security clearance required. But the salary was 3 times what I'd make at a zoo, and the work promised to be challenging in ways that clinical practice never could be. The facility itself was modest. 3 main buildings connected by covered walkways, a generator building, storage facilities, and the observation complex where we housed our subjects. Staff consisted of 8 researchers, 2 veterinary technicians, 4 security personnel, and a rotating cast of specialists who'd fly in for days or weeks at a time. We were 27 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by old-growth forest and mountains that saw snow from September through May. My daily routine revolved around Subject 7. She'd arrived 6 months before I did, transported from a collection site I was never briefed on, with injuries consistent with a fall from significant height, fractured ribs, severe soft tissue trauma, possible concussion. Dr. Michael Chen, the facility director, showed me her intake records during my first week. She was dying when they brought her in, he explained, pulling up x-rays on his computer. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, shock. Sarah, Dr. Whitmore, our previous vet, spent 3 days in emergency stabilization, touch and go for almost a week. The x-rays showed a skeletal structure that was humanoid but not human. Broader rib cage, heavier bone density, skull morphology that fell somewhere between Homo sapiens and something more archaic. The hands visible in the radiographs had opposable thumbs and the proportions of manipulative intelligence. "What is she?" I asked, though I already suspected. "Officially, she's an unclassified hominid species. Unofficially," he looked at me carefully, "she's what the locals have been seeing in these mountains for 200 years, and she's probably one of the last of her kind." I met her in person that afternoon. The observation complex was designed like a primate research facility. Large enclosure with climbing structures, enrichment materials, climate control, and one-way observation windows. Subject 7 was resting on an elevated platform, still moving carefully around her healing injuries, her body covered in dark brown hair that was graying around the face and hands. When I entered the enclosure, she turned her head toward me with complete awareness. The eyes were dark brown, deeply intelligent, watching me with the same evaluative assessment I was giving her. She stood slowly, favoring her left side where the ribs had been fractured, and made a low vocalization. Not aggressive, more like inquiry. I stopped 10 feet away. "Hey there," I said quietly. "I'm Rebecca. I'm going to be checking on your health, making sure you're healing properly." She tilted her head slightly at my voice, then made a gesture with one hand, palm up, fingers slightly curved. It looked like offering, or maybe questioning. "Doctor?" Chen's voice came through the intercom from the observation room. She does that when she's uncertain but not threatened. We think it's a non-aggressive greeting gesture. How much does she understand? More than we can measure. She recognizes individual humans, responds to tone and body language, shows clear problem-solving ability. Dr. Park, our behaviorist, has been working on communication protocols. She's learned about 30 signs. Sign language. They'd taught her sign language. Like Coco the gorilla, like Washo the chimpanzee, like every captive ape who'd been taught to communicate with their captors. I looked at Subject 7, standing there in her enclosure, watching me with those intelligent eyes, and felt the first stirrings of what would become profound moral discomfort. Over the following months, I fell into a routine that felt both professionally fulfilling and ethically troubling. My primary responsibility was maintaining Subject 7's health, regular physical exams, managing her recovery from the initial injuries, monitoring for signs of stress or illness. But the more time I spent with her, the more I recognized that I wasn't treating an animal patient. I was providing medical care to a person who couldn't consent to that care. She was approximately 8 feet tall when standing fully upright, though she usually moved in a more bent posture that suggested both comfort and caution. Weight estimated at 600 pounds, though getting her on a scale voluntarily proved impossible. Age was unclear. We had no reference points for her species, but Dr. Chen estimated late 40s to early 50s based on tooth wear and other physical indicators. Her personality emerged slowly. She was cautious but not fearful, curious but not aggressive, patient with our intrusions but increasingly assertive about her boundaries. She learned quickly that certain behaviors would get us to leave her alone, turning her back, moving to the far corner of the enclosure, making a low rumbling sound that clearly meant, "I'm done with this interaction." Dr. Elizabeth Park, our behavioral psychologist, worked with Subject 7 for 2 hours every morning. She taught her basic ASL signs: food, water, sleep, hurt, outside, no, yes, more. Subject 7 picked up new signs rapidly and began combining them in ways that suggested grammatical structure. One morning in July, I watched through the observation window as Subject 7 signed outside repeatedly, then pointed at the windows showing the forest beyond. When Dr. Park signed back, "Not now," Subject 7 made a sign we hadn't taught her. She pressed both hands against her chest, then pushed them outward with clear emotion. "What was that?" I asked through the intercom. Dr. Park's voice was subdued. "I think it was want or need or maybe please. She invented it. She's creating language to express desires we haven't given her words for." That evening, I found Dr. Chen in his office reviewing video footage from the day's sessions. "Michael, we need to talk about release protocols." He looked up from his computer. "She's not ready. The rib injuries are fully healed, but we don't know enough about her species' social structure. If we release her alone and she needs a group, she's told us she wants out." Repeatedly, with increasing clarity. She's communicated a preference, yes, but she doesn't understand the complexity. She understands she's trapped. That's enough. I sat down across from him. "We're keeping a sapient being in captivity without consent. That's not research, that's imprisonment." Michael was quiet for a long moment. "Rebecca, do you know how rare she is? There might be fewer than 100 individuals of her species left. Maybe fewer than 50. We're documenting cognitive abilities, communication capabilities, physiological data that could be crucial for conservation, for protection. Protection from what? From whom? From being hunted, from being captured by less scrupulous interests, from being exposed to a world that would either worship her as a miracle or hunt her as a monster." He pulled up a file on his computer. 6 months before she came to us, there were reports of hunters tracking something large and bipedal in the Bitterroot Range. They posted trail camera footage online. Within a week, there were 40 vehicles crowding the Forest Service roads. They were hunting her, Rebecca. For sport or for proof or for profit doesn't matter. They were hunting her kind. So we're protecting her by imprisoning her. We're protecting her by keeping her existence quiet, while we gather enough data to make a case for federal protection, for habitat preservation, for recognition as an endangered species. And how long does that take? He didn't answer. That night, I reviewed our protocols, our research timeline, our publication schedule. Everything pointed toward years more of study. Subject 7, healing and healthy and desperate for freedom, would remain in captivity indefinitely while we built our case for her protection. I started quietly to plan an alternative. The turning point came on a night in late August. I was conducting a routine evening health check, examining Subject 7's teeth and gums with her cooperation. She'd learned that compliance with medical procedures meant the interaction would end faster. As I worked, she watched me with steady attention, then did something she'd never done before. She reached out slowly and touched my face. Not aggressively, not fearfully. With careful, deliberate gentleness, her massive hand, easily twice the size of mine, cupping my cheek with such precise control that I barely felt the pressure. We stayed like that for maybe 10 seconds, her hand on my face, her eyes locked on mine. Then she made a vocalization, soft, melodic, with clear phonemic structure. Not English, not anything I recognized, but unmistakably language, with all the emotional weight that language carries. She was trying to tell me something. I documented the interaction in my evening report, noting the unprecedented physical contact and the vocalization patterns. Dr. Park reviewed the footage the next morning with barely contained excitement. That vocalization has structure that matches patterns from 3 other recordings we've captured over the past year. She's been consistent. This isn't random sound, she's using words from her own language. She played the audio again, highlighting the spectral patterns. And that gesture, the face touching, in great ape communication, that's bonding behavior. She was making a connection, trying to communicate trust or relationship, or asking for help, I said quietly. Dr. Park looked at me. Yes, that's also possible. Over the following weeks, Subject 7 became increasingly communicative. She began combining ASL signs in longer sequences, hurt inside no body, when we checked her physical health, but she was clearly distressed emotionally. Outside tree home want, when she stood at the windows looking toward the forest. Human no understand, when we failed to grasp what she was trying to express. She also began drawing. We'd provided her with paper and charcoal for enrichment, expecting the kind of abstract mark-making you might see with captive chimpanzees. Instead, she produced representational images, a mountain landscape with a specific rock formation, a grove of trees with a clearing, a group of tall figures, smaller than her, but clearly the same species. She was drawing her family, her home, the life she'd been taken from. Dr. Chen convened an emergency ethics meeting. All 8 researchers crowded into the conference room, arguing positions that ranged from immediate release to indefinite study. We're on the verge of breakthrough data, Dr. Raymond Torres, our geneticist, argued. Another 6 months and we'll have complete genomic sequences, population genetics, evidence that could support Endangered Species Act protection. She's not a specimen, I countered. She's a person. She's told us she wants to leave. We're ignoring that because it's inconvenient for our research. We don't know that her species has the same rights framework. She has the same cognitive capacity as humans. She has language. She has art. She has family bonds. What more do you need? The argument went in circles until Dr. Chen finally held up his hand. This decision isn't ours to make. The facility's mandate comes from the trust, and the trust's priorities are... The security alarm cut him off. Someone was at the perimeter fence. At 2 in the morning. Multiple someones. We rushed to the security office. The perimeter cameras showed 4 figures moving through the forest. Tall, bipedal, covered in hair, moving with coordinated purpose. They approached the fence line, then stopped, standing just beyond the security lights. Subject 7's family. Her people. They'd found her, and they'd come to take her home. The figures remained at the perimeter for almost an hour, clearly visible on infrared cameras. 3 of them were taller than Subject 7, 1 significantly smaller, possibly a juvenile. They moved with obvious intelligence, staying just beyond the fence line, occasionally gesturing to each other with hand movements that suggested complex communication. Dr. Park was frantically documenting everything. This is unprecedented. Evidence of social structure, coordinated search behavior, problem solving. They tracked her here across at least 20 miles of wilderness. They're her family, I said. They've been looking for her. Subject 7 knew they were there. She was standing at the exterior window of her enclosure, both hands pressed against the glass, making vocalizations that were clearly communicative, calls and responses passing between her and the figures outside. The smaller one made a high-pitched sound that Subject 7 answered with what I can only describe as maternal urgency. That's her child, I said, certain despite having no evidence beyond instinct. She has a child out there. Dr. Chen was on the phone with someone, his mysterious contacts at the trust presumably, speaking in terse, quiet sentences. When he hung up, his face was pale. They want her moved. Tonight. To a more secure facility. What? Dr. Park turned from the monitors. Why? Because if her people have found this location, others might too. Hunters. Media. The trust can't risk exposure. There's a transport helicopter being scrambled from Spokane. ETA 90 minutes. We can't move her, I said. Her family is right there. This is our chance to release her safely, to return her to her community. That's not the mission, Rebecca. His voice was hard. The mission is preservation of the species through controlled study and eventual managed release under protective legislation. Not chaotic reunification that exposes them all to risk. Risk from what? From us? We're the ones who caged her. The argument was interrupted by a crashing sound from the observation complex. We ran back to the security monitors to see Subject 7 systematically destroying the interior of her enclosure, throwing equipment, tearing down enrichment structures, breaking everything she could reach. Not in rage, methodically, with clear purpose. She knows we're going to move her, Dr. Park said, stunned. She understands what we're discussing. The figures outside the fence had moved closer, now visible in the security lights. The largest one, male, clearly powerful, was examining the fence structure with focused attention, testing it, looking for weaknesses. If we don't open that gate, I said quietly, they're going to come through it. They're not leaving without her. The fence is electrified, one of the security officers said. They touch it, they'll... Subject 7 screamed. Not the low vocalizations we'd heard before. An actual scream. High-pitched, anguished, unmistakably a warning to those outside. The figures immediately stepped back from the fence. She'd just warned them, protected them from the security measures. Even in captivity, even separated by barriers, she was caring for her people. I made a decision in that moment that I'd been building toward for months. Michael, if you transport her, I'm going to the media. Tonight, I'll give them everything, photos, videos, documentation of sapient behavior, evidence that we've been holding a thinking being against her will. I'll destroy the trust's credibility and expose this facility to exactly the scrutiny you're trying to avoid. Rebecca, don't... Or you let her go. Right now. You open that gate. You let her reunite with her family, and we end this the right way. I looked at him steadily. This facility is in my name on half the veterinary documentation. I approved her captivity. If this goes wrong, I'm culpable, so I'm making it right. Doctor. Chen looked at me for a long moment, then at the monitors showing Subject 7 destroying her prison and her family waiting outside. The transport helicopter will be here in 45 minutes, he said finally. Whatever we're going to do has to happen before then. We had less than an hour to do what should have been planned over weeks. No time for gradual reintroduction, no protocol for safe release, no certainty that Subject 7's injuries had healed enough for survival in the wild. Just the absolute moral clarity that keeping her any longer would be worse than any risk freedom might pose. I went to her enclosure alone. She was standing at the exterior window, both hands pressed against the glass, still making vocalizations toward her family. When I entered, she turned to face me, and I saw in her eyes something I'd never seen before. Hope. I approached slowly, hands visible, and signed, "Outside. Go home. Now." Her reaction was immediate. She straightened to her full height, made a sound that might have been question or confirmation, and looked at me with such intensity that I felt the weight of what I was proposing. Not just opening a door, committing an act that would end my career, possibly face legal consequences, and certainly destroy the facility's research program. "Yes," I said, signing and speaking. "I'm taking you home." I led her through the corridors toward the exterior access, a route we'd never taken during her captivity. She followed me with careful trust, moving quietly despite her size. When we reached the door that led to the outside, I paused. "Once you're out, run. Don't look back. Take your family and go deep into the wilderness where we can't follow. Understand?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, she reached out and touched my face again. The same gesture from weeks before. Connection, recognition, maybe gratitude. Then she signed something I hadn't taught her. A gesture she'd constructed herself, pressing her hand to her chest and then extending it toward me. "Thank you." I opened the door. The night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and autumn cold. Subject 7 stepped through cautiously, testing the space, then with increasing confidence. She moved toward the fence line where her family waited. The gate was already open, Dr. Chen having made his own decision about the right course of action. The reunion was silent. The figures moved toward each other carefully, the largest one reaching out to touch Subject 7's shoulder, face, checking her for injuries with clear concern. The smaller one, I was certain now it was her offspring, pressed against her side, and she wrapped one long arm around the juvenile in an unmistakably protective gesture. They looked back at the facility once, at me, standing in the doorway, at Dr. Park and Dr. Chen, who'd joined me, at the place that had held one of their own for nearly 2 years. Then they turned and moved into the forest, 4 tall figures walking upright into the darkness, disappearing among the trees with remarkable silence. I watched until I couldn't see them anymore, until the forest had swallowed them completely. "The helicopter will be here in 20 minutes, Dr. Chen said quietly. "We need to decide what we're telling them." "The truth," I said, "that we had a sapient being in captivity without consent, that her family came for her, and that we chose to let her go, rather than compound our ethical violation. They'll shut down the facility, end all our research, possibly file charges. Then that's what they'll do." I looked at him. "But we'll have done the right thing, finally." Dr. Park was reviewing footage from the exterior cameras, watching the thermal signatures of Subject 7 and her family moving through the forest. "They're heading northeast, straight toward the most remote section of the Selkirks. They know exactly where they're going." "Home," I said. "They're going home." We spent the next 20 minutes documenting everything, writing statements, copying files, preparing for the consequences we knew were coming. The helicopter arrived right on schedule. They didn't send a transport team. They sent a tactical unit. The helicopter touched down at 04:30 hours, and 12 personnel in military-style gear deployed immediately, securing the perimeter with practiced efficiency. No insignia, no identification beyond security credentials that looked federal but weren't from any agency I recognized. The team leader was a woman in her 40s, compact and hard-eyed, who introduced herself as Commander Patricia Vale. She scanned the facility compound with visible assessment, then turned to Dr. Chen. "Where is the specimen?" "Subject 7 was released approximately 40 minutes ago. She reunited with what we believe was her family group and departed the area heading northeast." I watched her face carefully. What I saw wasn't surprise. It was controlled fury. "You released an unclassified biological asset worth potentially billions in research value and national security interest without authorization. We released a sapient being who was being held against her will," I said. "There's a difference." "Dr. Hale," she said my name like a diagnosis. "You signed confidentiality agreements and security protocols that specifically prohibited unsupervised contact and unauthorized release. You violated federal law. I violated facility policy. Last I checked, imprisoning thinking beings wasn't legally protected activity. The legal framework for their status hasn't been established. Until it is, they fall under wildlife research protocols, which give us jurisdiction." She turned to the team. "Fan out. Full search of the facility. Confiscate all research materials, data storage, documentation. I want everything." The next hour was controlled chaos. The tactical team swept through every building, downloading computer files, confiscating hard drives, collecting specimens and samples, boxing up years of research. Dr. Chen tried to assert his authority as facility director. They ignored him. Dr. Torres tried to protest the seizure of his genetic samples. They escorted him outside. I was separated from the other staff and brought to a small conference room for individual questioning. Commander Vale sat across from me with a digital recorder and a file folder that had my name on it. "Dr. Hale, let's be clear about your situation. You've destroyed a research project valued at over $40 million. You've released a specimen that represents the only documented example of an unknown hominid species in controlled study. And you've violated security protocols that carry criminal penalties. I provided medical care to a patient who expressed clear desire to leave captivity, and I facilitated her reunion with her family. Any court will. There won't be a court. This never happened." She opened the folder. "The Stillwater Research Facility will be shut down effective immediately. All research conducted here will be classified and sealed. You and your colleagues will sign additional NDAs with penalty clauses that will financially ruin you if you speak publicly about anything that occurred here. You can't." "I can. I am. This is being handled at a level that doesn't involve public courts or media scrutiny." She leaned forward. "What you don't understand, Doctor, is that you haven't protected her. You've exposed her. Her people are now on federal radar at the highest classification levels. There will be surveillance, tracking, satellite monitoring of remote wilderness areas. DNA collection from environmental samples. We will find them, and when we do, the study will continue, just without naive researchers who think sapience equals immunity from national interest. The words hit like physical blows. I'd thought I was freeing Subject 7. Instead, I'd made her entire species a target. Why? I asked. Why does this matter to federal security? They're not a threat. They're an unknown biological variable on U.S. soil. They have cognitive capabilities that haven't been assessed. They have adaptive camouflage that's evaded detection for centuries. They potentially have knowledge of wilderness areas that could be strategically significant. And, most importantly, if they exist here, they might exist elsewhere. Every nation with significant wilderness is now asking the same questions. She closed the folder. You wanted to protect her, Dr. Hale. Noble impulse. But you're a veterinarian, not a strategist. You didn't free her. You just escalated her people's endangerment to the highest level of classified interest. The facility was emptied by dawn. Every computer, every file, every sample, every piece of equipment that had been used in Subject 7's study, all of it loaded into trucks or flown out by helicopter. By 0800 hours, the Stillwater Research Facility was a shell, stripped of everything that had made it a research center. The staff was gathered in the main building for final briefing. Commander Vale stood at the front of the room, holding a stack of documents. Each of you will sign revised NDAs with penalty clauses of $5 million for any unauthorized disclosure. You will not discuss your work here with anyone, including family, colleagues, or legal counsel. You will not publish research derived from this facility. You will not contact each other regarding these matters. She began distributing the documents. These restrictions are permanent and enforceable under federal security statutes. Violation will result in prosecution. Dr. Chen signed without reading. Dr. Torres signed while crying. Dr. Park hesitated, looked at me, then signed. When the document reached me, I read every word. The legal language was dense but clear. I was being required to remain silent about Subject 7's existence, her capabilities, her release, everything. In exchange for my silence, criminal charges would not be filed for my unauthorized actions. What if I refuse? I asked. Then you'll be charged with violation of federal wildlife research protocols, theft of government property, and disclosure of classified information. You'll be prosecuted under seal, which means no public trial, no media access, no chance to make your case publicly. You'll serve time in federal prison, and the story you're trying to tell will never be heard. That's not legal. It is when national security classifications are invoked. Sign the document, Dr. Hale. Take the restrictions and walk away. It's the best outcome you're going to get. I looked at the document, then at my colleagues who'd already signed, then at the tactical team watching us with patient expectation of compliance. I thought about Subject 7 out in the wilderness with her family, trying to disappear back into the silence that had protected her species for millennia. I thought about federal surveillance programs now tracking her movements, collecting samples, building profiles. I thought about what Commander Vale had said. I hadn't protected her, I'd exposed her, but I'd also given her months with her child that she wouldn't have had in captivity. I'd returned her to her family rather than let her die in a cage. I'd treated her at least once as a person rather than a specimen. It wasn't enough, but it was something. I signed the document. Smart choice, Commander Vale said, collecting the papers. You're all released from employment effective immediately. Severance packages will be provided under the terms of your original contracts. Do not attempt to return to this facility. Do not attempt to contact each other regarding classified matters. Go home. Move on with your lives. We were escorted off the property individually, driven to different locations, deposited with instructions to find our own way home. I was left at a gas station in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, with my personal belongings in a duffel bag and a check for 6 months severance pay. I called a taxi, checked into a motel, sat on the bed in a room that smelled like old cigarettes and cleaning chemicals and tried to process what had happened. I'd freed a prisoner and created a refugee. I'd ended unethical research and triggered classified surveillance. I'd done the right thing in the worst possible way. The motel TV was showing morning news. Nothing about the Stillwater facility. Nothing about unknown hominid species. Nothing about the biggest biological discovery of the century happening in absolute silence. Just weather reports and traffic updates and a world that had no idea what was hiding in its wilderness areas. being hunted by agencies that had no accountability. I turned off the TV and sat in silence. That was 12 years ago. I'm 53 now, working as a small animal veterinarian in coastal Washington, treating dogs and cats and the occasional backyard chicken. I haven't done research since Stillwater, haven't published, haven't contacted any of my former colleagues, though I sometimes see Dr. Park's name on behavioral psychology papers that never mention the most significant behavioral data she ever collected. The silence is permanent. The NDAs remain in force. The facility was demolished 2 years after the raid. I saw a brief news item about decommissioning of unused federal research infrastructure in Idaho. No mention of what had been studied there. But I watch the news carefully now, looking for patterns, looking for signs. 3 years ago, a Forest Service officer in northern Montana reported finding a complex shelter structure in remote wilderness. Sophisticated construction, no human tools used, no identification of the builders. The report was briefly available online before being removed. Classified, presumably. 5 years ago, environmental DNA sampling in Olympic National Park detected genetic material that didn't match any known species. The researcher who made the discovery lost his funding. The samples disappeared from university archives. Last year, a satellite imagery analyst posted on a cryptozoology forum about unusual heat signatures in British Columbia wilderness. Bipedal patterns, too large for human, moving in coordinated groups. The post was deleted within hours. The analyst's account was suspended. They're still out there. Subject 7 and her family and however many others exist in the remaining wilderness. And federal agencies are still tracking them, still collecting data, still building the case for whatever comes next. Protection or exploitation, I don't know. Sometimes I drive up into the mountains, park at trailheads, hike into old-growth forest. I never see anything, but occasionally I'll find things. A footprint in soft earth that's slightly too large and shaped wrong for human. A tree with bark stripped at 8 feet high. A formation of stones that looks deliberate. Messages, maybe. Or just coincidence. Or wishful thinking from someone who wants to believe they're still free. I got an email last month from an address I didn't recognize. No text, just an attachment. A photograph taken from distance, grainy and low resolution, showing tall figures moving through fog in what looked like subalpine terrain. 4 figures, an adult, 2 juveniles, and 1 smaller form. Subject 7's family, growing, surviving. I deleted the email immediately, as required by my NDA, but I saved the photograph to a thumb drive that I keep hidden. Evidence that she's still out there, that the release, however complicated its consequences, gave her back to her life. I don't know if I did the right thing. The moral calculus is too complex. I freed one individual but exposed an entire species to classified surveillance. I ended unethical captivity, but triggered intensified federal interest. I followed my conscience but possibly endangered the very beings I was trying to protect. All I know for certain is that Subject 7 was a person, thinking, feeling, communicating, loving her family, and she wanted to go home. And for 2 years, we denied her that fundamental right in the name of research and conservation and protection. So I opened the door, and whatever consequences followed, at least she walked through it free.